Hello and welcome to the First and 10 podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Feltz, here in Bloomington, Indiana. We're back on the show. Got some stuff that we're kind of long overdue for. We're doing our 2020 season report cards about 4 months after the season ended. But hey, we're doing it. And we've got some good stuff to say about last year, some takes about next year. Believe it or not, we're just 4 months away from kind of being in the zone for football. Believe it or not, we're kind of coming up on it. So here to break it all down with me is Reid Murray. We're doing our Big Ten 2020 report cards. How are you doing, Reid?
I'm doing great, Pat. And, just thinking about how close the season is, obviously the season's not starting in a week or anything, but you look at it, 4 months away, that's some pretty good timing. And it's going to be a fantastic season. First of all, most likely we're going to have fans in the crowds everywhere. I'm planning on going to a lot more games than I usually do next year. It is going to be a fantastic 2021 season, and I can't wait for it. But right now, let's talk about how we thought 2020 ended and preview a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, 2021 is certainly going to be better than 2020. Fingers crossed. We'll get more games, I'm sure. Probably going to have full crowds. We're both vaccinated. And as that starts to roll out, I'm sure we're going to see, things start to open up more, which is great because full crowds really make football. And it was a weird year without them. So, the crowds and the non-conference games and the full schedule, all of that, I think is going to make it probably a more enjoyable season than 2020 was here for us. So we're just going to go through these teams in 2020. We're going to give them a report card, a grade for how we thought their season went, A to F scale. We're just going to go through them alphabetically. So the first team, Illinois, 2-6, last place in the Big Ten West, fired head coach Lovie Smith. Hard to see much optimism here with the 2020 Fighting Illini football team.
Yeah, it's a terrible way to follow a 6-6 season where you go to a bowl game. Obviously not what you want to be doing. And it's not like the Big Ten West was easy by any stretch of the imagination, but still certainly a disappointing season, certainly a disappointment. But I mean, I don't want to go all the way and give this team an F because they did face a lot of adversity with COVID issues. They had a non-ideal quarterback situation. Juicebox Williams stepped up, and they were able to
Juice Box.
They were able to compete here and there. In one of their wins, the Rutgers one was kind of a crappy win that
it was absolutely fluky.
But they competed, and you got to applaud them for that. And I'm going to go ahead and give Illinois a D+. Terrible season, but I don't want to go all the way and give them an F. They faced some tough situations, and they didn't completely back down. So I'm going to go ahead and give them a D+.
Yeah, and I think the thing with these things is they're all relative to expectations. So just spoiler alert, I'm going to give Michigan a lower grade than I give Illinois just because the expectations for them are always higher. So Illinois didn't really have that much of expectations, but they still were a letdown. I would say there were some expectations at the very least. You went bowling in 2019 and in 2020, you won 2 games, but they were competitive, faced a lot of adversity. But 2-6 and a fired coach, I mean, it's hard to give them much more than a D, and a flat D is what I'm going to give them. Terrible season for Illinois. Maybe it turns around next year. Something we haven't really gotten to talk about here, though, is hiring Brett Bielema, the former Wisconsin and Arkansas coach. So, Reid, what do you think of Illinois hiring Brett Bielema?
I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I've said this before. I don't know that it makes a ton of sense to fire Lovie when things finally seem to be going in the right direction. They had a bowling season last year. And of course, the season wasn't great this year, but like I said, they dealt with
pretty bad.
And they were able to fight. They definitely had some spirit. And there's things to build on there. And so when it seems like maybe, they've let him stay on the team through tons of bad years, and now they'd let him go when you think next year in a more normal season where you have non-conference, you play more games, you could potentially get to a bowl game again, have even more to build on. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but who knows? Maybe they're going to have some resounding success in the next 2 or 3 years, and I'll be proven wrong.
I think it's tough to make a sweeping claim like we've been, Seeing coach has done fireable things in a pandemic season, at least on the field, fireable things. I'm not talking about off the field stuff. I think there are coaches across the country who have done some fireable stuff off the field during this pandemic. Notably Les Miles, but I don't know if Lovey really deserves to get canned first and foremost, but he did, and Illinois moved on, and Brett Bielema was the new coach. Obviously, things didn't work out with Brett at Arkansas. He got fired there after, some success, but, he went to the NFL, worked with the Patriots. But I think that Brett Bielema makes a ton of sense back in the Big Ten West. He was successful at Illinois, and then he ended up going or Wisconsin, excuse me. I'm not forecasting here with that, but he was a successful coach at Wisconsin, had some success at Arkansas, obviously didn't work out in the end, but I think his style, his real smash mouth football style, fits a lot better in the Big Ten West than it does in the SEC West. So I think he will be probably, a fairly successful coach. I think the expectations are higher than they were in some of those terrible Lovey seasons, and certainly, those Tim Beckman years. So I think Illinois has a chance to be pretty good under Bielema. He knows the Big Ten. He knows the Big Ten West. He knows how to play these teams. He fits the style. And I think another important thing is, from what it sounds like, he wants to start recruiting the state of Illinois, which is something Lovey didn't do. And I'm not saying Lovey recruited poorly. He actually recruited pretty well for Illinois standards, but he didn't recruit in state. And that was one thing that PJ Fleck has done great at Minnesota, is he's recruited the state of Illinois better than Northwestern and Illinois. So it sounds like Bielema wants to start recruiting in state more. And I think that's only a good thing to keep guys in your backyard. So we'll see how this Bielema hire turns out, but I think it could work. At first, I was really surprised when I saw it, but I think it could work. I'm not totally against this.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we will have to see. But Indiana, the next team on the list?
Yes, it is. So the Indiana Hoosiers finished second in the Big Ten East, 6-1, but a loss in the Outback Bowl. Obviously a historic season for Indiana. First time that they've beaten Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State in the same season ever. First win over a top 10 team since the 80s. First win over Michigan since the 80s. Came within 7 points of beating the national runner-up Ohio State Buckeyes. And, you saw some awesome things from Michael Penix Jr., from Jamar Johnson, from Micah McFadden, from an awesome defense, the Swarm D, and a really good offense too. But, the bowl game did leave a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. All things considered, though, I think this season is a resounding A for Indiana. One of your best seasons in the last 30 or 40 years. Yes, it was disappointing that they only got invited to the Outback Bowl. I think they deserved more than that. They deserved a better bowl bid than Northwestern. However, didn't end up showing out in the Outback Bowl. And, they didn't really get to practice ahead of that game because of COVID, and that hurt them. And obviously not having Michael Penix Jr. makes this a completely different team versus what we saw from them for most of the season. But, you still did not play very well that game. And I don't think anybody's going to dispute that claim. Indiana didn't play well in the Outback Bowl against Ole Miss. But all in all, you look at the regular season, particularly what they did when Michael Penix was healthy. This was a great year. And even when Michael Penix wasn't healthy, they still got that grinded out win over Wisconsin. And I think the team we saw play against Wisconsin is not the same team we saw play against Michigan State or Michigan or Penn State or Rutgers or whoever. It just was a different team. And that was with Jack Tuttle at quarterback. They couldn't do a lot of the things that they did with Penix, just, different skill set, not really as electric as Michael Penix, but there aren't many players in the country who are. And yet they still got that really solid win at Wisconsin. So all in all, an incredible season for Indiana. Didn't end the way you wanted it to, but I think there's a lot to build on going forward, and I think they're going to have a more successful year in 2021.
I got to go ahead and give Indiana a solid A here. I would say it would be an A+ if not for that Ole Miss loss, because you look at the season, like you said, beating those teams, Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State, all in the same year, unprecedented, just absolutely fantastic.
Even if those teams were down.
Yeah,
let's be quite honest.
They're having great years. I gotta be honest. None of those teams are having fantastic years.
I think the Penn State one though.
Something. The Penn State one, that's a program-changing win.
Yes.
That
exactly what I was going to say.
It changes the way the people look at the program, changes the way the program itself, their outlook on the season.
They got the monkey off their back.
Yeah,
Couldn't
that
be
is
the top 10
program.
team. Always came so tantalizingly close. Just couldn't do it. Here we are.
Yeah, and you look at their resume, and you might say, "Oh, well, Michigan, they were terrible. Penn State, they had a bad year." You know, but they got a win against Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, granted, their record wasn't great. Wisconsin was still a pretty damn good team last year, even though their record didn't really reflect it.
And I think records, by the way, were misleading in this season because you didn't
Yeah.
get to pad it out with FCS and G5 teams. You had to play
Yeah.
nothing but conference opponents.
Yeah, you're right about that. And you go on the road to Wisconsin and you pick up a tough win against
in December. Wisconsin, Camp Randall in December,
and they don't have a starting quarterback. So that's really impressive to me. They went on the road, and of course, being home and away doesn't mean really that much this season. But they go on the road to a team who won the Big Ten yet again, who just slapped the absolute tar out of Clemson. This is a fantastic Ohio State team, and they came this close. So this is a great year for Indiana. I think they build on it and become something even better next year. A lot of people are saying they're going to have a down year, just because, I mean, for somebody who doesn't know, Indiana football that well, who doesn't spend a lot of time watching them, I would get why somebody would say, if you're an SEC fan or a Big 12 fan or whatever, I would get why you'd say Indiana's going to be worse next year than they were this year, just because this was the best year they've had in decades. And it's hard to follow that up, especially when you got some solid players, Jamar Johnson, Whop Phillier, et cetera, going to the NFL. But I think they become something even bigger and better next year. Incredible season to build on, but I just can't give them that A+ because that Ole Miss loss. That is just embarrassing, both to Indiana and to the conference. And it just thinking about that game makes me sad, honestly.
Yeah, that really left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. That was a disappointing game.
They're going to come back next year upset about that, and that's going to be fuel in the fire. But it's just, it's hard to continue to pat a team on the back, go out. And, Ole Miss, they're a wild card team. They can, you look at their quarterback, they throw either 6 touchdowns a game or 6 interceptions a game. You never know which Ole Miss you're going to get. And with a team who plays all offense, is a high scoring offense, but their defense isn't really there, you never know what you're going to get. So, Ole Miss, they could have beaten Alabama. They almost did. So, I think you can't look at that game and completely say, well, Indiana just completely sucks now because of that. But it's embarrassing. They got to do better than that. A for Indiana.
Yeah, I do think, though, one thing that has gotten kind of under the radar with the Outback Bowl is that they didn't really practice ahead of time. They were dealing with some COVID issues, the COVID issues that canceled the Purdue game. Really sounded like a team-wide outbreak. So that's just a variable that you had this season that affected a lot of teams. And it's not just them. It's really everybody. But I think next season is going to be an improvement for Indiana, and they're going to have opportunities to get wins in conference, out of conference, play Cincinnati, obviously get Ohio State at home too. They've got a tough schedule, but I think this team is going to only improve. Yeah, looking at who they bring back, they do lose some good players, you said, Phillier, Jamar Johnson, but I think they retain just about as many solid players. Micah McFadden, Michael Penix will be healthy. Ty Freifogel coming back is massive. But, yeah, if there's ever a year for Indiana to go and do even greater things they did last year, it's going to be this coming season. So I think it could be a big year for Indiana, and there's a lot to be excited about if you're cheering for this team. So Indiana gets an A from both of us. Moving on, though, our next team, the Iowa Hawkeyes, finished second in the West, 6-2, did not play in the Music City Bowl, which is what they were invited to, canceled due to COVID. Iowa started out kind of slow, but by the end of the season, they really found their stretch. They really got things going late thanks to that defense. What did you think about Iowa this year? I thought they certainly exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to go ahead and give the Hawkeyes a solid A-. The season didn't start out great, that is for sure. But they picked up some solid wins down the stretch. They were ranked pretty highly, and they were ranked more highly than I think they deserved for a good portion of the season. But they were definitely a ranked team. and you can't argue with that at the end of the year.
6-2 Big Ten team.
Yeah, I think first of all, if Northwestern hadn't had such a great season, that's kind of um, a random terrific team Northwestern became.
That I absolutely called.
Yeah, you put this Iowa team in this year's Big Ten or last year's Big Ten or something like that. They're totally going to Indianapolis in the first week of December. But, I digress. I think if you were to put them in the Music City Bowl, if that game were to actually happen against Missouri, it wouldn't be much of a contest. I think Iowa was clearly the better team there. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we didn't get to see that game. But certainly an A-. I love their run game with Goodson and Sargent. I love what they had going there. Spencer Petras, obviously just a pretty average quarterback, but he's a young guy. We could see him improve in the future. This Iowa team definitely has something to look forward to next year. Solid season. And Iowa's a team that's kind of known for being 7-5 or so, and getting that one big upset. And obviously 6-2, it's you put them in a 12-game season, you never know what that record is going to become. But that is a solid record, and it's certainly something to be proud of. But certainly something that's better than what they normally get. So terrific season for Iowa. Could have been better, so I'm giving them an A-, but solid job overall.
Yeah, I think you got to be happy with this for Iowa. Really good season. You saw some good improvements. I thought Tyler Goodson had a better season than he did his freshman year. Good team, just a very solid team. I don't think they were going to blow you away ever, but they were never going to underwhelm except for those first couple games of the season, the Purdue game and the Northwestern game. But after that, they really found their groove. And I was happy with what we saw from Iowa. So,
and hey, that Northwestern game, they lost that game by 1 point.
Yeah.
It's not like they went out and got beaten by 3 possessions by them. So, the Purdue loss, yeah, that was bad. That shouldn't have happened. But the Northwestern game, they played, one of their 2 losses was to the best team in the West, and it was by 1 point. They totally gave that game away. They were up, I want to say 17-0. They were up some big score early on, and they gave the game away. But that's, you talk about a solid loss. That's a solid loss.
Yeah, totally. A quality loss. I know that's a word everybody loves in college football, but, Iowa next season isn't really losing a ton, but, from just looking at it. But however, the number of starters you're losing is 10, which is a lot more than most of the other teams in the conference because of the extra year of eligibility being given out by the NCAA. So seniors, yes, they can come back for another year. For example, Ty Freifogel's coming back for a super senior season, but 10 starters is honestly a pretty good number. They lose 3 starting offensive linemen, both of their top receivers, including Amir Smith-Marset. So
they're not much of a passing team anyway, though. They'll be fine.
Yeah, but the 3 offensive linemen thing, that does worry me. However, it's Iowa. They always find offensive linemen. That's their thing. So we'll see. I don't think we're going to see, probably not going to see a huge improvement from Spencer Petras without those top 2 receivers, but we'll see. I think they're still going to be a good team, obviously relying on their defense and their running game. It's Iowa. We're not breaking any new ground here, but I think that opening week game against Indiana and Iowa City is probably going to be, the one that sets the tone for both of these programs in 2021.
Yeah, I agree with you. Next team.
Yeah. So Iowa. Oh, I didn't give my grade. I'm giving an A-. I think this is a really good team. But not a perfect season by any means. They really found their groove late and gave themselves a lot to build on going forward. Next team, Maryland Terrapins. So this is a really weird one. They finished their season 2-3, a lot of COVID issues, and they were 4th in the Big Ten East, despite getting a win over the number 3 team, Penn State. Maryland, what a weird season. I don't know how to feel about this team. Their 2 wins were over Penn State and Minnesota. They blew the doors off of Penn State, number 1, and Minnesota absolutely choked that game. We all remember it in overtime. That was actually a really good game. It was 45-44. It was a Friday night game. A lot of fun, but
and do you remember who called that Minnesota was going to miss that extra point?
Reid Murray texted me, actually. For those of you who are unfamiliar, yes, Minnesota lost the game on a missed extra point in overtime, and Reid texted me when they were kicking the extra point. He's like, he's going to miss it. I was like, we'll see. Missed it. So yes, I can vouch for Reid. He called it. Yeah, so Maryland, really weird team, weird season. Uh, I'm not sure if I have much to take away from this Maryland season. I think I'd give it like a B minus because they did beat Penn State, and I know that carries a lot of weight for Maryland fans. Maybe a C plus, somewhere in that range, but I'm not really drawing much from this season because they had so many COVID issues. I am drawing a lot though from the recruiting progress we've seen from Mike Locksley. Maryland is recruiting really well, and they're recruiting really well in Metro DC and the DMV, which is a big deal because they have that recruiting base there. So the fact that their recruiting has picked up so much, and they did have some really good players on their team last season who will be returning, by the way. I think they improve. Maybe not just this year. I don't know how much they improve this year. I think they'll, maybe go 6-6 this year. But next 3 years, I think this can be a team that wins 8 or 9 games.
I agree. This one, you might not like this grade for me. You might think I'm a little crazy for this. I'm going to give Maryland an A on this season.
What?
I think
they won 2 games.
I thought they were going to win 0 games, and they went out and won 2. I think if they had played more games, they would have won more than 2.
No, that's a good point. I had low expectations for them too.
And the thing is, with my grades, they're all relative to what I expect from them.
That's a really good point. Maryland, maybe I'll bump them. I think B minus for me though. I'll say B minus because it still wasn't like a particularly good season. It was a weird year for everyone, but particularly for Maryland. I'll put them at that solid B minus. But A, I mean, they didn't even go to a bowl game.
I mean, nobody from the Big Ten went to a bowl game, really. But hear me out here. Hear me out.
Okay.
This is a young team with a transfer quarterback who had never played a snap for Maryland. And of course, his first game, they get the doors blown off him by Northwestern. But this is a young team. 2 best players in the team are one of them is Rakim Jarrett, a freshman. The other is, I believe, Talia was a sophomore last season. Either way, 2 young players who are really getting the job done for the team. They go in, and even that Penn State win, Penn State, horrible year, not the Penn State we're used to seeing, but this is still a team built of 4-star guys. And Maryland goes in on the road, and again, being on the road doesn't mean a whole lot this year, but they go and they just blow the doors off. That says a lot to me. And yeah, the Minnesota win, whatever, say what you want about it. Simply just looking at this team, a team I expected nothing from, going in and winning these type of games and beating Penn State the way they did, that's worthy of an A for me. That is an incredible season for Locksley to build on. I think they're building something special in Maryland, and I'm giving them an A.
Wow. And I know you mentioned Jarrett and Tagovailoa as their 2 best players, but totally forgot about who I think is their best player, Dante Demas. What a great season from him. That's a guy.
Yeah. Call this the hot take of the show or whatever.
Totally.
Maryland with an A.
Yeah, Maryland with an A from Reid Murray.
I mean, like I said, all my picks are relative to their expectations.
Yeah.
And I expected Maryland to be, I mean, we said it on the show week 2 when we had Nar on. We said, no question, Maryland's the worst team in the Big Ten. No question. They get 4th in the East. And again, the East was kind of a mucky division when you get to the bottom. But they finished above Michigan. I mean, how rare is that? So I think I was impressed by them, to say the least.
Yeah. Improvement for Maryland. I think that's something you can hang your hat on. But let's talk about another team who's going to be ranked very relative to our expectations here. The Michigan Wolverines, 6th in the Big Ten East, 2-4. Big fat F for Michigan. What an awful season.
I got to agree with you here, Patrick. I thought about giving them like a D- or something. You can't give this team anything but an F. God, Michigan.
Get on your.
Nothing went right this year. Nothing went right this year. Highlight of the year was a win against this sucky Minnesota team. And to be fair, they did beat them pretty badly. But highlight of the year, win against a bad Minnesota team. All the best players are gone now. Nico Collins went at the draft. Every other good player transferred. There's and you go to play Michigan State, and it's a Michigan State team. They got a new coach. They don't have a whole lot of talent. It's Rocky Lombardi you're going up against. It's a rivalry game. You're ranked. You got no reason to lose this game. You got momentum on your side. You got a rivalry game. You got all that, and you go and lose that one. Embarrassing. Should have lost to Rutgers. They shouldn't have 2 wins. They should only have 1. It's just pitiful. It's absolutely pitiful, and they're going to be even worse next year. And that's the funniest and best part about all this. And I feel bad for Michigan. I say this a lot on the show. I feel really bad for this team.
Whoa.
Because they every year they play their rivals. They never win. And every now and then they get a little bit of mojo and they think they're going to get it done. 2016, 2018. 2018, they were the clear favorite. And they just got completely, I don't even know how to describe the beating they got in that game. 2016, they, of course, lost in double overtime. But they never beat their rivals. They're a program, they have high expectations. They've won Heisman's, they've won national championships, they've won Rose Bowls, and they've had nothing about them in the last decade. They come in, they get their, alum coach who's been to the Super Bowl. He's an accomplished NFL coach, and they still can't get anything done. He's winless against his rivals. They extend him for another 5 or so years, and they're probably paying him ungodly amounts of money. I haven't looked at the details of that contract, but he's getting paid a ton of money for 8-4, 9-3 seasons. But now all the good players are gone. I mean, the secondary last year was atrocious. They're going to have a new defensive coordinator. But, I mean, God, it was just horrible. And if I was a Michigan fan, I would just be in so much pain. I mean, good thing you guys have basketball to look forward to. Of course, they didn't go to the Final Four, I think, this year, but they won the Big Ten regular season title.
And they went to the Elite Eight without their best player healthy in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, good for them.
Heck of a season.
However, Michigan football, oh my God, you can't give them anything but an F. Horrible year. And I think next year, I think when we're doing this episode next year, we might have to create an F- for Michigan.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not looking up for Michigan, and in a full 12-game season without COVID, things could get even worse because they will have to play Ohio State. Unlike this season, the only positive is that they didn't lose to Ohio State because they didn't play.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing you can take away from this. And yeah, everybody who's worth their 2 cents is either in the draft or transferring.
Yep.
This team's in trouble. And this team is in trouble now. They might be the worst team in the Big Ten East next season. It wouldn't surprise me.
In my opinion, their best player was Giles Jackson, and he's gone now. He played for Michigan as a freshman, and he did some damage. And I was worried about it. I said, this guy's going to become something special. He and Nico Collins going to be a good 1-2 punch. Well, Nico Collins opts out of the season. Now he's in the draft. Now Giles Jackson is going to Washington. Where do you go from here, Wolverines?
And you even look at all these talented players who they did have playing last season and still couldn't do anything with who were going to the draft. Cameron McGrone, Kwity Paye, Jalen Mayfield.
I mean, he could have been picked in the first round of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, it's embarrassing and it's pitiful.
Honestly. It's absolutely embarrassing, and it's totally deserving of an F. Not a doubt in my mind that this deserves anything except for an F. Terrible season for Michigan. I don't see it getting much better in the near future. So good luck with that, Michigan. That's all I have to say. Next team, though, the last place team, the Big Ten West or East, excuse me, who actually did beat Michigan. That's Michigan State. They finished 2-5. Not really anything I didn't expect from Michigan State. I mean, I expected them to be bad. They did kind of have a dry cupboard. They didn't have a lot of talents. New head coach. Didn't really expect them to win a whole lot of games. They didn't win a whole lot of games. We'll see what happens going forward under Mel Tucker, but not really great first impression. But they did beat Michigan, so there's at least something.
So, Pat, you're not going to like this pick for me either. And keep in mind, once again, just like Maryland, we're talking about expectations. We're taking everything into perspective. And we're not going to sit here and say that a 2-5 season is better than a 6-2 season or whatever. but we got to look at it from what we expect in the beginning of the year, what we expected after week 1, and all that. I'm giving Sparty an A-.
What?
You look at this team, new coach. Who on this team, who on Michigan State is a superstar player?
Nobody. That's a great point.
Exactly. Who on this team would you look at on their roster going into the season and say, this guy is going to make a huge difference and he's going to win games for the team? Nobody. They got very little to work with. Of course, 2-5 record. It's not great. And obviously the Rutgers loss, that one looks bad. Michigan is a bad team. They still beat their rivals in a game that was a hard fought game. So that's solid. They go and beat the best team in the West, Northwestern. And of course, they weren't a better team than Northwestern by any stretch of the imagination.
No, absolutely.
That was kind of a trap game.
But guess what? They won the game.
They won the game, Patrick. They won the game. And it wasn't like they won by 1 point or they won on a last-second field goal. They were leading for pretty much all this game, maybe the entire game. I forget the exact specifics, but because I don't know if Northwestern was up 3-0 early or whatever. Who cares? They were up for pretty much the entire game, and they sealed the deal. That is solid, especially on a team with little to work with, a new coach. I think they're going to recruit a lot better in the following years because of the foundation. Obviously, 2-5, not a great record. I still think it's a good foundation to build. It's something that you can look back on positively. I'm giving them an A- for a solid foundation for the future of Michigan State. And we've seen bad seasons for Michigan State before. They've been able to bounce back. Of course, that was not under Mel Tucker as head coach. But we've seen bad seasons from them, and they've bounced back. I mean, they're the most Jekyll and Hyde team in college football in the last 4 or 5 years, going from 3-9 to 9-3, just like that. But I think this is a fascinating start to the Mel Tucker era, and I like where they're going. Northwestern win.
That's a good point. The Northwestern win, and you beat your rival. You beat Michigan. That's a big deal. But a lot of those 5 losses were embarrassing. Got blown out by Ohio State, shut out by Indiana.
It's Ohio State. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I know. But they gave Rutgers. Rutgers was more competitive than we thought they'd be, granted. But they gave Rutgers their first conference win.
I'll give you that. That one
in what, 3 years? I mean, but you know what? The Northwestern win and the Michigan win, I both thought were good. So, listen, yes, Michigan was bad, but that's still your rival, and that proves a lot in recruiting too. So,
yeah, you're competing with Michigan for those in-state recruits.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So saying you've got that head-to-head win, I think that's a big deal. I think I'm going C+. Yeah, it wasn't really an impressive year, but you know what? There's stuff to build from here. Ricky White kind of disappeared after that Michigan game, but he had that Michigan game, and maybe that's because Michigan's defensive backs were, some of the worst in the nation, but he did have that game. So I think Ricky White's got potential to be maybe an all-conference receiver if he hits that peak. So they've got some guys, and they had some success. Their 2 wins, I think, were 2 big wins. If you could circle any 2 wins besides Ohio State on their schedule, if you were like, what would be the 2 most impressive wins for MSU? It'd be beating your rival, Michigan, or 2 most important, beating your rival, and then beating an undefeated team. And that's what Northwestern was at the time. So 2 gigantic wins for MSU, but the rest of the season was still a letdown, so I have to give it a C.
I see what you're saying there. Yeah, obviously our grades were different, but certainly a respectable opinion.
Certainly. Next team, Minnesota Golden Gophers, 3-4. Terrible start to the season, kind of an awkward finish to the season. But after what we saw from Minnesota last year, being ranked in the top 10 at the end of the season, winning 10 games, this was an awful, awful, awful season for the Gophers. And yes, they lost a lot. Rashad Bateman opted out at the beginning of the season. Then he opted back in. Then he opted out again. And we saw some serious regression from Tanner Morgan. No Tyler Johnson, obviously. No Antoine Winfield Jr., obviously. So that was 2 of your most important players gone. But what we did see from Minnesota is something that I think they can build off going forward, and that's Mo Ibrahim. This guy's the best running back in the conference. And yes, their season was pretty disappointing, and I am going to have to give it a C. In fact, I'm going to give it a C- just relative to what we saw last year. This is a certain letdown for Minnesota. from high hopes and high expectations. Not a good year, but I think they can build something this coming season with Mo Ibrahim at running back, because running backs like him don't grow on trees, and he was certainly the best running back in the conference last year. I think he's going to be the best running back in the conference this year.
Pat, I'm going to go ahead and give the Gophers a team that I was pretty high on, that I expected a lot from. I'm giving them a D minus. Talk about letdown of the year.
Yeah, I get it.
Other than Mo Ibrahim, nobody on this team was good. And this is the team we expected them, or at least I expected them to, if they didn't win the Big Ten West, at the very least be in the conversation. Week 1, they go and play a Michigan team who we just gave an F to.
Mm-hmm.
And they got slapped around.
All right, D+ actually for me. I'm going D+. I'm going D+. The only thing keeping them above a D, D- or F is Mo Ibrahim.
Yeah, and so I think you got to give Mo Ibrahim credit. But, I mean, a player like him, it's just a completely one-dimensional offense. And it clearly wasn't enough. And, you go back, you look at that Purdue win. They should have lost that game.
They totally should have lost the Purdue game. That was the biggest BS of all time.
Nebraska, it's kind of a sucky win, to be honest with you. And you can say they should have won the Maryland game, but I mean, even if they make that extra point, you never know what's going to happen there. Only thing you can really look back on positively is an Illinois win, and even that's not super impressive. And the following week, they went and got the doors blown off them by Iowa. So really nothing positive to look back on in terms of results. And you had one of the best receivers in the draft, Rashad Bateman, or at least he was going into the season. Now, I mean, he's certainly going to be a high draft pick. I put him probably in the second round, but
I'm hearing first round on him from everything I've seen.
I'm hearing first and second.
Yeah.
I would put him in the second, honestly, considering the way he played, but who knows? Maybe NFL GMs see something different than me. And of course, they're smarter in terms of drafting than I am, way smarter. But, his draft stock fell after he had a pretty disappointing year. Mm-hmm. Tanner Morgan, a guy who I said could be a Heisman sleeper. Wow. He
certainly put the sleeper in that.
Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't expecting their defense to be fantastic. I knew that was going to happen, but I thought their offense could compensate for that a little bit. They just completely didn't. Letdown of the year, I would say even more of a letdown than Penn State. I got to go D-.
Yeah, I'm going D+ here. Not a good season for Minnesota. Next team, Nebraska. Here's another letdown. Although we didn't really expect much of them. 3-5. Scott Frost has still not managed to get a winning record during his time in Lincoln. Still has not made a bowl game in his time in Lincoln. Terrible year for Nebraska. Again, a lot of letdowns here, but Nebraska, I think, is worse than some of these other letdowns. Like, I would say they're worse than, in my opinion, worse letdown than say Illinois, because Illinois, you've got the new coach, you got a little bit of like momentum, a little bit of optimism. Nebraska, there was no room for optimism. I mean, they were terrible last year, going to be terrible next year, and they're losing their best player. Wan'Dale Robinson is gone. He's going to Kentucky. So D- is my pick here for Nebraska. I didn't really expect much from them. I don't expect anything from them next season. They've got a very hard schedule too. It's going to be a terrible year for Nebraska in my mind. Not looking forward to this team.
I got to go ahead and give Nebraska a D. And I got 3 words for you, Nebraska. Fire Scott Frost. This team is just absolutely shambolic. And that's all I got to say about it, honestly. And sure, they had a hard schedule. I guess that's why I'm not giving them an F or a D-. But wow, they are bad. And they are going to be, I think next year they're going to have the worst season they've had since 1957 when they went, I want to say 1-9.
Wow. I think it's going to be a terrible year for Nebraska too. They might not be the worst team in the Big Ten next year, but they might have the worst record. They might have the worst record. I don't know if they'll be the worst team, but they will have the worst record in the Big Ten because they have a tough schedule.
They're always going to have a tough schedule because you look at them, they play Wisconsin and Ohio State every year.
And they have at Oklahoma.
Yeah, they tried to get out of that one.
Uh-huh.
Good for Oklahoma. That one is going to be.
That's going to be an all-time bloodbath.
It's going to be Oklahoma's going to be number 1 in a lot of people's rankings after that game.
And it's going to be totally misleading because
You look at
I mean,
Nebraska and say, oh, prestigious program.
wow, they did that to Nebraska. No, Nebraska sucks.
Yeah.
Nebraska's not going to be good next season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, D- for me. Probably going to be a fat F next season. I see no optimism here. I doubt Scott Frost makes it another year. And I don't think it's entirely his fault, but he certainly ain't helping.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, on the exact opposite end of that spectrum, the Northwestern Wildcats, who this is probably my last chance to gloat about this. I called it. I knew they were going to win the West. Just want to make that clear one more time. Thank you very much, Reid. Thank you for the applause. But I called it. They won the West. A+. Great season for Northwestern. I think they got, maybe a little. I both think they didn't get into good enough of a bowl game, and yet they got into too good of a bowl game. I don't think they should have been in a better bowl than Indiana, but at the same time, I think that they and Indiana both should have been in New Year's Six bowls, and that the committee just kind of hates the Big Ten. I think they were both better than Iowa State, for example, better than probably more deserving than Florida, Oregon. But that's just because of the auto bid, the Pac-12. So yeah, that's my 2 cents there with the whole bowl game situation. But Northwestern, I mean, you can't say anything bad about this season. Obviously, the Michigan State loss was embarrassing. And if that hadn't happened, they could have been playing for a chance to go to the college football playoff against Ohio State, and in a game they led and at the very least had a chance to win for most of it until Trey Sermon did Trey Sermon things. So I would still call this an A+ for Northwestern, though. Just an awesome season, especially relative to the average expectation, coming off of a 3-win season and turning it into this. Total great year for Northwestern. A+.
Yeah, and Pat, I hope you know that when I was giving you that little applause, obviously you couldn't hear it listening, but I gave him a little hand silent clap. I wasn't being sarcastic in any way because that's fantastic on your part to call that because it's the Northwestern team coming off of a 3-9 year where they beat Illinois and pretty much nobody else. So really just a great job by Northwestern. Bounce back, one of the best bounce backs I've ever seen. And I'm giving them an A+ too. Apart from that Michigan State loss, this is about as perfect of a season as you can get. And it really is a shame that that's how the season had to go because if they don't lose to Michigan State, first of all, they would be undefeated going into that Ohio State game. Let's assume they still lose. That's a one-loss team who almost beat Ohio State. You've got to put them in the playoffs somewhere. And you
or you could say that about Indiana too, a one-loss team who almost beat Ohio State.
Yeah, but that's different. Because with Northwestern, you could say, oh, well, they won their division.
Yeah,
and I agree with you.
But the difference is Indiana got screwed by just being in the East, I guess, and playing, in the East, then with that logic. But regardless, though, both of these teams should have been in the New Year's Six. That's not a doubt in my mind. Yeah,
and it sucks that Oregon had to go because the whole stupid tie-in thing at Iowa State, even though they lost to a team that Coastal beat. Whatever. I've written an article about this. We've complained about this countless times, both on the show and on our own personal time. So that's not a here nor there. But Northwestern, apart from that Michigan State loss, it's a damn shame that the season had, because you look back on that, and without that loss, you could say, well, this is about as perfect of a year you could get. It's super unlikely you're going to beat Ohio State anyway, and they almost did. And of course, you can make the Ohio State argument one of two ways. You could say, well, if Justin Fields is having a decent day, if Chris Olave is there, if a whole lot of the missing pieces on the team are there, then it's not as close of a game. But on the other hand, you could also say if Trey Sermon doesn't have the best game of his life, then Northwestern probably wins the game. So, they played a close, tough game against a team who was, I think, pretty clearly the second best in the country. Obviously, Ohio State got smacked around by Alabama in the national championship game, but hey, that's one.
But everyone would have. It's Alabama.
Yeah.
Come on.
So they played a terrific game against the second best team in the country, and especially when compared to what they did last year, going 3-9, that is just unbelievable. And of course, I think the Citrus Bowl win, Auburn, they were bad in my opinion, and they honestly, their record, there were 2 or 3 pretty fluky BS wins on their resume. So they
should not have beaten Arkansas.
Should not have been a 500 team, to be honest with you. but whatever. They're Auburn. They made it to the bowl game. And Northwestern got the job done. Something you can't say about Indiana is they were put into a bowl game that they thought they deserved. They thought they deserved a better bowl than Citrus Bowl, but they showed up and they took care of business. So you got to hand it to them there. Great job by Pat Fitzgerald, once again proving he is one of the nation's best head coaches, despite being at a Northwestern program that's anything but prestigious. A+ for the Wildcats.
Yeah, the issue is I do not see it lasting into next season.
Oh, no way.
Number one, Mike Hankwitz there, great defensive coordinator who's been there forever. He's gone. He's retired. Great send-off for him in that Auburn game, though. So Mike Hankwitz is gone. Peyton Ramsey's gone. There's your starting quarterback. Who knows what they're going to do at quarterback? If it's anything like their 2019 quarterback situation, it could be a disaster. And I don't think their skill position players are what got them to the Citrus Bowl. It was their defense, and they're losing some of those great defensive players. Patty Fisher's gone. Brandon Joseph, he'll obviously be back, but they are losing some of those good defensive players. Greg Newsome's gone too. However, they do have a pretty easy schedule from what I can tell. Their non-conference is Indiana State, Go Trees, Duke Blue Devils, and Ohio U, that is, not Ohio State. So not really a tough non-conference. I think they can still make a bowl game.
Hope you know they're losing to Duke. Northwestern always loses some crap game like that against a mediocre Power 5 opponent.
Ohio might be the team they lose to. They always lose to somebody they shouldn't, and they might lose to Michigan State week 1 too. That's who they play week 1. They might still have some demons from that.
Favorite never
that
wins
last season.
The Michigan State game. Whoever's favored.
That's a great point. Yeah. So Northwestern's going to be favored because they were the better team last season, even though Michigan State won the game last season, and Michigan State's going to win that game. I'm calling it right now. So I do think people are going to be relatively let down by Northwestern in 2021, but I don't think you should really expect anything different. They had a very good quarterback last year who they're losing. They're losing their all-time defensive coordinator. Tough to come back from both of those. And they're losing their defensive captain in Patty Fisher. So tough to come back from all those losses. Might not be the year a lot of people are expecting from Northwestern. You're going to see a lot of people say that they're going to win the West because they won the West last year. And that's really just not a good way of looking at it, because I think that's also unfair to them to have that high of an expectation on them. Yes, they had a good season last year, but I don't know how sustainable it is in the grand scheme of things. Maybe in a year or two, they can have another year like it, but this coming season, I think it's okay to temper your expectations for Northwestern.
Yeah. But talking strictly about this year, fantastic. Certainly A+.
Oh, zero complaints. A++. Great season by the Wildcats. Next team let's get into the Big Ten champions, the Sugar Bowl champions, and the national runner-ups, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Reid Murray, I'm giving them an A. I can't give them an A+ because they did get blown out in the national championship by, of course, the Alabama Crimson Tide. However, you go undefeated in the regular season. Obviously, the Michigan game gets canceled, and that sucks. And you had close calls with Indiana and Northwestern. But every other game, no contest. And no contest in the Sugar Bowl, where I think we saw the full version of what this Ohio State team could be. Justin Fields throws 6 touchdowns on broken ribs, just absolutely crushes Clemson, not even a game. And that's a Clemson team who Ohio State has struggled to beat for years and years and years, has never beaten Clemson ever until that Sugar Bowl. They exercised a lot of demons that night, and that was just an all-time win for Ohio State. That's going to be a game that Buckeyes remember for a very long time. So it's an A for me. Obviously not getting the job done on the Natty. Can't give them that plus, but they're not even being competitive in the national championship. Can't give them the A+, but still a very solid A. Conference champs and crushing Clemson. It's tough to get much better than that, but the A, totally. They met expectations and I think exceeded them a little bit. So great season for Ohio State. We'll see what next season looks like.
Yeah, so at Ohio State, there's parts of me that want to give them. Well, first I'm going to say I gave them an A. And looking at the Clemson game on its own, that alone kind of makes me want to give them the A+, just because that is just such an unbelievable win against a team that, first of all, just from the program Clemson has beaten the program Ohio State every time they've played them. But also the guys on the field for Clemson, tremendous athletes. They have the number 1 pick in the draft. Obviously, that's not confirmed yet. The draft hasn't taken place. But Trevor Lawrence definitely get the number 1 pick. Fantastic.
Yeah, not a competition.
Yeah. Fantastic defense, and they go in and they torch them. It just a solid team all around. No, I shouldn't say solid. Elite. Clemson was elite last year, and Ohio State made them look silly. But you look at the season as a whole, and Ohio State, the regular season was honestly, it left something to be desired. They were not at their full capacity for the entire year. They almost lost to Indiana. They almost lost it. And it seems like they were saving something for the Clemson game all year, but it wasn't even certain they were going to play Clemson. They almost didn't. If they had fully given that Indiana game away, which they came pretty close to. Same with Northwestern. They were close to giving that game away. I think the only full performance of the year outside of the playoff was the Michigan State game. And they completely slapped them around. But the Penn State game, that's a Penn State team who you got to beat them. I mean, Maryland beat Penn State worse than Ohio State did. Indiana, of course, tremendous Indiana team, but you got to do better than what you did there. Nebraska, I mean, first game of the year, sure, but Nebraska, they're not a good team. So they weren't really at full capacity the entire year. And I think if they had played Michigan, maybe we would have seen that complete performance before the Clemson game, but maybe it worked out for the best. And they saved it all for that Clemson game. And they got it done. But I can't give them an A+ because if they were to lose the national championship by 7 points or so, we could maybe be talking about an A+ year. But even then, that might not be an A+ because you go to Ohio State for 2 things, or really, I should say 4. You want to beat Michigan, you want to win the Big Ten, you want to win the national championship, and of course, a lot of guys go to Ohio State to go to the NFL. And so really the 2 huge goals that a lot of guys go to Ohio State for is to go to the playoff and win the championship and go to the draft. Ohio State, they sent a lot of good guys to the draft this year. They didn't win the national championship. They didn't compete for it. And so if you want to get an A+ season at Ohio State, you got to win that national championship, and they just didn't do it. It wasn't quite enough, but still great season to look back on. It wasn't perfect, but certainly a great second year for Ryan Day. And you look at Ryan Day, he's got 2 losses in his career, and they were against Clemson and arguably the best team in college football history in Alabama. So Ryan Day's coaching resume looks great so far, especially when you look at those recruiting classes. Great year to look back on. Would have been even greater if we had a Michigan win to watch the highlights of here and there. Unfortunately, we don't, but that Clemson win in and of itself is just a fantastic memory as an Ohio State fan. And I said right after the game that is the best Ohio State moment, really the best sports moment I've ever had. And I've thought about it. And now that I think about it a little more in the moments past, I think it's certainly top 2, or I'll say it's top 3. It could still be number 1. I think I still have to think about it a little more, but the Michigan win when Michigan was number 4, we were number 10. We won that game 62-39. And of course the double OT Michigan win, which I was in the stadium for, those definitely rival it. But either way, this is a Clemson game. And we've said this countless times. Clemson has given this team trouble for years, and Ohio State finally pulled through, and they pulled through in dominant fashion. So I can't say enough good things about that game. Still going to be an A for me, though.
Yeah, great season. And looking forward a little bit next year, what do we think with this Ohio State team? Obviously, a lot's going to change. No Justin Fields. Keeping that receiver group intact, I think, is huge, but still probably going to be about as good. Definitely a top 4 team in the country, right?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say, well, see, I don't want to jinx this. I don't want to, because there's a lot that's going to be changing. I mean, it's Ohio State we're talking about. This is a team that they still have Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, those 2 guys on their own, not even considering all the other fantastic talent in their receiving core. They can change a game and change a season. Quarterback situation still up in the air. CJ Stroud believed to be the starter. But I mean, the spring game is going to happen. And there's all kinds of spring practice. Certainly a starting QB battle. It's believed to be between him and Jack Miller, but who knows? We could see a third guy come in and win that job. So a lot is up in the air, and they got to replace some really good talent at the running back position, the defensive line position. They're not replacing much at the cornerback and safety positions, but they need to fill in some solid guys there. They need to step it up. But I think it's a team that, unless they lose to Indiana, will go to the Big Ten championship and win it. It's a team that certainly can make the playoff. I don't think they're going to win a playoff game next year. But who knows? If CJ Stroud comes out and he's the next Justin Fields and boom, right away, he's just a world beater, talking about a different team here. So it's hard to put a solid prediction down right now in early April. But it's Ohio State. They're not going to go and be 8-4 or something like that. Knock on wood. Probably shouldn't have set a prediction that specific. But we're talking about Ohio State here. They're going to go and achieve great heights.
Right. I mean, it is Ohio State. You got to just kind of consider that. I mean, I hate looking at the name on the jersey, but it's the name on the jersey for Ohio State. They're always going to be good. Come on. Yeah, but next season, I think the only game that can really probably trip them up is Indiana, and we'll see.
I think any game can trip them up, to be honest with you.
I don't know about that. This feels different than the Urban Meyer teams. That with those Urban Meyer teams, when they lost those games like the Iowa game and the Purdue game, I kind of saw them coming. You just had a feeling with them. I've never gotten that feeling with the Ryan Day team. I've gotten that feeling, going into games against good teams. Maybe against Alabama, I'm like, Clemson, even Indiana last season. But against a bad team, I don't see it happening. And even against a mediocre team, if Ohio State is solidly better than a team, I don't see them losing.
Well, here's the thing. This Ohio State team, they remind me of 2016 Ohio State. A team with pretty much the entire team was really Curtis Samuel. And I think this year, I'm not going to say the entire team. I should say the entire offense in 2016 was Curtis Samuel. And of course, there's still solid weapons at Ohio State. Like I said, it's Ohio State we're talking about. There's 4 and 5 stars all across the field. But the two guys that are going to carry the team are Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson.
Mm-hmm. It's huge that they're coming back. Olave is coming back. Wilson had to.
But I think they're going to rely a lot on those guys. And if you play a game, I don't know who on the schedule it could be. But, we got some solid teams in the Big Ten who are better than they usually are in Michigan State, Maryland, and Rutgers. One of those teams could potentially beat Ohio State if they rely too heavily on one of those guys, and it doesn't work. You look 2 years ago, Ohio State nearly lost to Maryland. That was a bad Maryland team, and they beat them by 1 point. 1 2-point conversion goes differently, and Ohio State in 2018 loses to Maryland, in addition to losing to Purdue. The year before, they lose to Iowa. And, of course, those are Urban Meyer teams. But to be fair, Ryan Day, he's only had one full season where you play 12 games where he didn't mess it up and loses some bad team. Last year, you can't really look at that and say, oh, well, Ohio State is in a new era. They're done doing that. Because last year, of course, they didn't have that full season, and they didn't really have a true trap game. They had the Indiana game, but we saw that coming from a mile away that Indiana's a good team. We knew it at that point. So we could still get some kind of trap game situation there, and it makes me worried. But I'm not talking about Ohio State. We talk about them too much anyway. Let's move on.
We do talk about Ohio State a whole lot. That's kind of the whole show. But anyway, next team, Penn State. So they start 0-5, finish 4-5. I'm just giving a solid C. I think my Penn State theory for 2020 is that we had 3 different Penn State teams. There was the Penn State for the first 2 games against Indiana, Ohio State. That was definitely a top 25 team, and that could hang with Indiana and Ohio State, who I think are both very good teams. Then there was the Penn State for the middle part of the season that, say, got blown out by Maryland, that after those Indiana and Ohio State losses was just completely demoralized, had no energy, was dead, and was terrible. And that was for those next 3 games, and they were 0-5. And there was kind of this new Penn State that wasn't really the great team we saw early in the season, or at least a very good team we saw early in the season that I think just kind of ran into better teams in Ohio State and got unlucky against Indiana. But it was a better team than the one we saw for the 3 weeks prior. and it at least gave you something to kind of hope for going forward. But I'm still going to C. Obviously, a losing record at Penn State is unacceptable. But I don't think it's an entirely lost cause that they can, go out and be a top 25 team next year, make a decent bowl game next year. But I don't think they're going to be like a New Year's Six competitor for the next couple of years. So I think Penn State has fallen back down to earth a little bit into decency and not to, potentially elite status.
I don't know if I can say in the next couple of years in terms of New Year's Six, but I think certainly next year they will not be that New Year's Six competitor.
That's more fair. Yeah.
But yeah, Penn State 2020, major letdown. They managed to win a couple games late down the stretch. So sure, a good way to end the season, whatever. Not at Penn State's level, not what they need to be doing, especially that the Maryland loss is the biggest one where they just get. I mean, they got
what an embarrassment, really. Yeah, that is unacceptable.
That's embarrassing. It's completely unacceptable. The reason I'm giving them a D and not a D minus or say an F, it's not completely their fault, the situation. They lost Micah Parsons, the best player, due to an opt-out. The running back situation, obviously that's just tragic what happened to Journey Brown with his medical condition, not being able to play. It's not completely their fault. But of course, Sean Clifford, he was a guy who some guys were saying maybe Heisman sleeper, maybe second best quarterback in the Big Ten behind Justin Fields, these kind of labels. And he goes out and he was just horrible.
He laid an egg. He absolutely just laid an egg last season.
And, any sort of draft stock he was building up, he's kind of got to start from scratch again.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to give him a D. You're Penn State, and I know not everything is their fault that happened, but you got to be able to adapt, and you got to be able to perform better. D grade for you guys.
Yeah, it was a terrible season, but at the end of the year, kind of got a little bit of momentum back, and I don't think they were a bad team early on. I think for those first 2 weeks, they were actually a good team, and then for the next 3 weeks, they were awful. But for those last 4 games of the season, they ended up being a pretty decent team. So relative to expectations, I think it's an F, but, kind of looking at the grand scheme of things with, comparing week 5 Penn State to like the end of the season Penn State, and even week 1, week 2 Penn State, those are all 3 different teams. And at the end of all things, I think about a C, and the ceiling is a little lower going forward. But next team, Purdue. Here's a weird one. This is a team that started out red hot, finished 2-4. Probably should have finished 3-3. That Minnesota game, they won in my mind. They won that Minnesota game, but that's not what the record book says. Since that terrible pass interference call was called on that touchdown. I mean, if you remember it, you remember it. If you don't, look it up. It is the worst call you'll ever see. I'm not exaggerating. And I say that as somebody who is very much not a Purdue fan. However, 2-4 with Rondale Moore and David Bell, kind of disappointing for Jeff Brom because he's making so much money. One of the highest paid coaches in the nation, and a 2-4 record, I think, is unacceptable. I am going D+ for Purdue. They should have done better. Obviously, you don't get to play your rival Indiana, and Rondale Moore did miss some time, but Rondale Moore didn't even look like the same player this season in what we did see of him. So I'm going D+ for Purdue. Letdown of a season. I was pretty high on them coming into the year, and I was wrong. So maybe they turn it around, but we'll see.
Yeah, Purdue, I got to go C-. I was expecting them in this season, if we had a full 12-game season and basically COVID did not exist, I said in our Purdue preview months before the season that the Indiana-Purdue game should be a ranked game between teams who are both around 8-3. Purdue, their record was different this year because the structure of the season was, but this is anything but a team who deserved to be ranked. Biggest win was against Iowa, but that one is kind of they were a different team week 1 than they were in the last couple of weeks of the year. And I know that it's not their fault that Karlaftis was hurt, Moore was hurt. But you got to be able to do more with Bell and Wright at the wide receiver positions. You just got to be able to do more. Jeff Brom, I thought he was going to be the next big thing in terms of coaching. He just seems kind of average, to be honest. I hate to say it.
That Ohio State win clouds everything. If he never beat Ohio State, if that game never happened, and instead they played like oh, they played Michigan State that week and they beat Michigan State. Wow, congrats. But like, I think that clouds people's vision with it. And obviously that's a big win, but and he has brought Purdue from a very low place under Darrell Hazel to a pretty okay place, but he's not performing to his salary in my mind.
You got to bring them to the next level. They were okay, but you got to bring them from bad to okay, then okay to good, then potentially good to great. And they're still stuck at okay right now. And I thought this was going to be a year they potentially got to the good level, but they're not quite there yet. I expected a lot more from them, and they didn't give it to me.
Yeah, so that's Purdue, but two more teams to go. Rutgers Scarlet Knights. What a season for Rutgers compared to what we thought. 3-6. That sounds not like a very good record, but consider this. Rutgers played the most games of any team in the conference, number one. Number two, Rutgers, or at least in the regular season. Number two, Rutgers usually plays a pretty bad non-conference schedule. Let's be quite honest. They don't play any good teams in non-conference ever. So let's say they win all three of those. That's the team who goes to a bowl game. And for Rutgers, that is incredible. And I think Greg Schiano, he's recruiting really well. He is turning things around. Rutgers, wow, overnight, they're really good. So obviously I can't give them a great grade. They did blow that Michigan game. I can't give them an A, but B+ with a lot of stuff to build on going forward. An impressive year for Rutgers. And I'm excited to see what Greg Schiano has to do with this program, because I think they're moving certainly in the right direction, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this one as quick as possible because, it's been a long podcast so far, but B+ for Rutgers. Mm-hmm. I agree with you there. The recruiting for Schiano got a lot of solid transfer players to come into the program. That's huge. I really like what they're building over Rutgers, and they're going to become a much better program. They're already becoming a much better program. They're certainly not the 1-11 or so team that we've seen before. Steps in the right direction, and opening the season with a win, that's huge. B+, great season to build on. Mm-hmm. Obviously there was still some to be desired. They left some wins on the table there, but solid year. That's all I'm going to say.
Certainly a solid year, and a lot to build on. So we'll see with Rutgers these next couple of years. But last team, Wisconsin Badgers, 3-3, won their bowl game, though, won the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and broke the trophy against Wake Forest. But they totally should have won that game. Wisconsin is much better than Wake Forest. I mean, come on. And Wisconsin deserved a better bowl game, too. The whole Big Ten kind of got shafted in bowls. However, Wisconsin, 3-3, had some losses that were didn't really like, had some wins that they looked super impressive in. Graham Mertz had some great games, had some stinkers. If they can build this offense around Graham Mertz and fit his skill set, they've got their running back in Jalen Berger. They can fit his skill set. The defense and the offensive line are always going to be there for Wisconsin. Graham Mertz has the talent to be one of the top quarterbacks in the nation. If they can build an offense around him and have the skill position players, and this is a Wisconsin team that could potentially make a college football playoff in a year or two. However, after this season, I'm just giving him a B. It was a pretty decent year for Wisconsin, but a lot to build on. Graham Mertz is a future star in the making if they can build the right team around him.
I'm going to go C+ for the Badgers here. I think if they give Graham Mertz an offense, if they call plays and they really build the offense around him, he will be a Heisman winner. But unfortunately, and I said Mertz will be a Heisman winner, but if they continue to run their run-heavy offense that they've run for quite a long time, then that's not going to happen, because he's got to be able to actually sling the ball to win trophies like that.
At that point, he could be a transfer candidate.
Yeah. As much as I hate to say it, he could be leaving the Big Ten at some point.
If they don't fit it, because he has a very specific skill set, and Wisconsin doesn't really want to build an offense around it. That's just not Wisconsin.
And this is why this is the kind of thing why I think Mike Leach going to the SEC is really sad, because his kind of offensive style, I don't think it works in the SEC. It worked pretty well at Washington State in the Pac-12. If he was still at Washington State, Graham Mertz to Washington State seems like a match made in heaven, and he could become a superstar there. I mean, to be fair, any quarterback under Leach at Washington State kind of became a superstar in terms of his stats, but I think that Mertz could be at a whole other level. But I digress. Wisconsin.
I hope he stays at Wisconsin, for the record. I think they can build something special.
Yeah. I think they can.
If they make the offense fit him, then I think you could see a great team.
Yeah. I agree with that. And this year I got to give them a C plus though, because I mean they won the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Cool, you got a bowl win. Congrats. But it was against Wake Forest, and they beat him pretty handily. It was a good win. But just throughout the year, it was just kind of a mediocre season. It was kind of just, yeah, this was solid. It really, I think the C plus grade, this is the one that really is the least disputable. Or I guess Northwestern is probably the least disputable, but the C plus grade for Wisconsin, I think, is the least disputable because they were at 500, and of course, a lot of their issues weren't their fault. They had COVID issues, and the bad teams they played, they took care of business. They did not give Illinois an inch, and they just completely backhand slapped them. Michigan didn't give them an inch either, and they beat the hell out of them. So against the bad teams, they took care of business. Against the better teams like Indiana, they didn't. And that's just how it goes. It was an okay season. So that's really all I have to say about them. C plus, decent job, Wisconsin. I think they're going to be better next year. I think they have a solid foundation, but really nothing you can applaud too much right now.
Yeah, and I probably would have given them a C plus if I'm looking at it from a purely football perspective and what we saw on the field. 500 season with a mediocre bowl win. Okay, congrats. I mean, that's C plus level for Wisconsin standards. That is for Wisconsin standards. They have high standards. However, I'm bumping them up a little bit because I think you found your quarterback for the future in Graham Mertz, and I think you found your running back for the future with Jalen Berger. So, and you mentioned, by the way, you said that Graham Mertz would have fit Washington State. Nakia Watson, their other running back, he transferred to Washington State, which is funny. But
makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, I do think, though, there's a lot to build off of, and you've got those two very important pieces because the defense and the offensive line are going to be there at Wisconsin, period. But you've got your quarterback and your running back, and if you can build that offense to fit Graham Mertz's skill set, I think the sky's the limit for Wisconsin. And that's our last team. So that'll do it for our podcast today. Thank you so much for listening. We'll have some more episodes coming out soon, an NFL draft episode, I think, and then some more season preview content just throughout the offseason, heading up to the season in a couple of months. So for Reid, I'm Patrick. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one. Take care.